I'll formally call the meeting to order. It is 7 o'clock on Monday, July 6th. We have a quorum present. Graham will note that Wynn, Mary Beth, Led, and myself are present, and I think I saw Bill. Did I not see Bill? But Bill, on your thing it said elect, so I'm wondering if we elect you.
I don't know how that arrived there. I think it's an email address.
Oh, okay. Well, there's Bill. So we have 5 present and 2 currently unaccounted for. That's the call to order. And before we get started, formal thanks again to Diane Hines and of course Dominic for keeping this thing together. It's really amazing, the technology. I'm in awe about conducting meetings over the internet. So good job, Dominic and Diane. She's not here, but everybody knows how much work she puts into this stuff, and it's very impressive. And I annoy her a lot, so that's cool. Okay, going to that, we have some correspondence. Fran, I assume you'll get the correspondence forwarded to you. We do have 2 questions that the board has to deal with formally. That is the extension of the Cornwall Commons and the Camino property. For the record, the planning board established a policy some time ago. Dominic, you'll correct me, maybe it was 6 months ago, which had some requirements attached to the extensions. Could you just, for the record, explain that?
Yes. So when last year the board adopted a policy that would require applicants who are requesting ongoing extensions to provide a detailed update as to where they were with satisfying any of the conditions of the approvals. For the 2 that have requested extensions tonight, that would be for the Cornwall Commons bulk subdivision approval, as well as the lands of Camino / lands of Seaman subdivision approval. The applicants appeared not to have submitted the information that was requested. My recommendation to the board as a result is to grant a 1-month extension at this time, and we will follow up with the applicants to make sure that they have the board's policy and the form that was adopted by the board, so that you can consider it at your next meeting to see where they are at with their process.
That's very good, Dominic. Thank you. I'm bored. Anybody have any comments or questions or issues? Hearing none, would that require a motion, Dominic, for granting a 1-month extension, conditioned upon them reviewing and submitting the forms as appropriate?
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Well, unanimous. There you go. Okay. Thank you.
And so just for clarity, that would be for both the Cornwall Commons and lands of Camino applications.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Lands
Okay,
of Seaman.
Sorry.
Lands of Seaman.
Yes.
Lands of Camino. Oh, it's now Lands of Seaman. Okay. I didn't get your humor there, Lynn, for a second. Okay, we have discussion. We have 3 items for discussion. We can treat all 3 pretty much the same, but we'll go one at a time. One is for 3 Skyline Drive. That's the replacement and the enlargement of a deck. We did discuss this. I believe we did have the photos of this posted up last month. Kristen, am I correct about that? Where is Kristen? Has Kristen, are we missing Kristen?
Here. Sorry, I was muted.
Okay.
Yeah, Dominic had the pictures, the simulations of the proposed deck up just a few minutes ago. There we go. So yes, this application is in the Ridge Preservation Overlay District, and that is the reason it's before your board to make a determination whether this application would require a special permit or if it should go directly through the building inspector.
Okay, that's great. Great summary. Thank you, Kristen. We also have 45 Quaker Avenue. That's a suite. Everybody is familiar with it. We had a brief discussion on it. The adult dance studio. That's a relocation. That's in an existing space. Same issue, same referral. The suggestion is that we refer to the building inspector. And then the third issue, of course, is the temporary COVID virus related relocation of the parking lot for Storm King Arts Center. Dominic, do you want to address that pursuant to what we discussed?
Yeah, before we do so, my recommendation would be to treat these ones individually. And so for 3 Skyline Drive and the extension of the existing deck, my recommendation at this point would be for the board to consider a motion that would refer this applicant directly to the planning board. Excuse me,
Okay,
directly to the, that's the second time I've done that. Directly to the building inspector, rather.
Okay, with that, I'll ask for a motion just for that, for 3 Skyline
Given-
Drive.
Given the minor impacts, I move that we forward it to the building inspector.
Okay, we'll take a second. Second?
I second it.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, there, we'll refer that to the building inspector, and we'll go to 45 Quaker. That is the dance studio.
Yes. So the
That is
dance studio is a reuse of existing space at the Cornwall Plaza. It is not proposing any exterior modifications nor any additional demand on parking in that existing facility. They did appear at the work session, and they are looking for confirmation that no planning board approvals would be necessary for this conversion of this existing space to an adult dance studio.
Move we forward it to the building inspector for determination.
Second,
I second it.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Go. And now we'll go to Storm King Arts Center, the COVID issue.
Yes, thank you. And I know that there is a number of people here from Storm King Arts Center, and of course they are on the agenda later for consideration of their latest submission as to the master plan is concerned. But what this particular agenda item, and here let me throw up the plan, is related to their proposal to, I'm not sure if you can see that. Are you guys seeing the plan that I'm sharing or no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we got it.
Okay. Okay. You never can tell on this, not sure if you're looking at my Facebook or anything else that's up on my screen.
Dominic, we're good.
Yeah, we have a little bit of a Facebook issue here. I didn't know they were allowing that stuff on Facebook, by the way.
So in any event, this is, I believe, part of Storm King Arts Center's COVID-19 safety plan is the proposed use of the Scandret lot to basically be, how do you say, an intake area where cars are pulling in to be processed to see whether or not their attendees have previously purchased tickets for timed arrival at Storm King Arts Center, or if they haven't purchased tickets, whether or not they are at capacity and can have to be turned away, or whether or not they can be accommodated at this time. So rather than dealing with those issues at the ticketing booths and having people potentially being referred back out at that area, I believe the proposal is to use this existing gravel lot for this processing. And so if there's anybody, if I'm misspeaking or if there's anything to add to that, please.
The only thing I would add, Dominic, is that their cover letter indicates that this is proposed use for the 2020 season. So it would be for this year only.
So the request is to grant permission for this season for 2020.
Yeah, and
So my-
procedurally, go ahead.
No, I was saying that similar to the two prior actions, my suggestion is that you refer it to the building inspector to monitor. And if there are any problems, he still has the opportunity to refer it back for the planning board for further consideration. But perhaps determine you don't believe a site plan amendment application is required for this COVID-related temporary use.
So this is specifically not a site plan amendment.
That's correct. You would
It's a
not be
temporary
granting
use.
site plan. Yep. It's a temporary use, and it's being done as a result of the pandemic and to accommodate the ticketed arrival times for people. And as I understand it, the no parking is going to be allowed in this area. So it's not a parking lot. It's a processing area for people pulling into the site.
Well, it seems like a very appropriate short-term solution to a very unusual problem. So does anyone have any issue with it?
My only request would be that the building inspector make a careful determination about emergency vehicle access during use. That's all.
I think we can amend that to any contact we have with the building inspector in this regard. So any other questions? Okay, with that, maybe a motion? Win.
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Second?
Second, I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, there you go. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now we'll move to the approval of the minutes, the June 1st minutes. Did everybody have a chance to review them? Good job, Fran.
Yes.
Where is Fran? All these people disappearing. I don't have them on my screen. So I
Move
don't-
we approve the minutes.
Second,
Second it.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Dominic, the resolution for Motivate Physical Therapy. Did you prepare that resolution or we
I
voted
will
on?
send it to you separately.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Well, I'll just go down to town hall whenever during the week and sign it, whatever other resolutions there are.
Yeah.
after that.
No, it'll be
Dominic,
ready,
that
ready
was-
later this week.
That was authorized for signature already, Dom?
That's correct.
Okay, we have no public hearing scheduled tonight, so we'll move on to the regular agenda. The first item is the Verizon antenna. Where's Kristen? Kristen,
Yes.
want to do just a very brief summary? I think everybody knows about this.
Certainly. So the Verizon application entails the replacement of 6 antennas on an existing tower behind the Star Warehouse. That is in the PIO zoning district. Cell towers are allowed by special permits. The antennas themselves are going in the same location as existing antennas are. They're not, the tower is not increasing in height. There's no ground disturbance. There's no modification of any base equipment of any kind. It's just a replacement of the antennas. So no setbacks, no real zoning implications with respect to this application. In terms of the special permit, this board does, there are several special permit criteria, most of which are not being impacted by this application. Items like parking, circulation, various things like that. This board does have the ability to require a visual impact analysis for antenna replacement or modifications to a tower, particularly in light of the location of this tower across from the Scunnamunk Mountain. In this case, and if you look at C201, Dominic, I think that's like sheet 3 or 4, but that sheet of the plan set does demonstrate that the antennas that are going up are very similar to the antennas that are being replaced. There you go, Dominic, thank you. So you can see the antenna location it's the 4th set of antennas on the pole down, and also they look very similar to what is existing at this location.
So Kristen, are you recommending no visual impact review?
Well, it's really up to the board, but from this particular visual, it doesn't appear to me that there's going to be a lot changing in terms of visual impact.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mark?
Yeah, the only technical concern on these applications is a determination that the tower is capable of handling either the additional antennas or the replacement antennas. In this case, it's replacement antenna. The application does include a report from a New York State licensed professional engineer that indicates that the tower meets all the applicable codes. With that submitted and on record, I think they've fulfilled all the technical obligations that I would look for, and as well Gary would look for. So I'm in good position with this.
Okay, well, with that, Dominic, we just need a motion to waive the public hearing, I gather?
That's correct. You have the ability to waive the public hearing, and you could also move on to approval if you so choose.
Okay. board,
I
you have
think,
any
Neil,
comments? Go ahead,
I think, Neil, that C201 makes it absolutely clear that the public could not get angry about this because, as you see, they are proposed Verizon wireless antennas. This is a new type of antenna which doesn't cause anyone to get angry. You'll see it's called out twice there as being wireless antennas, which I think is
No,
very good.
no
You're
ire
it's-
involved.
it's wonderful. It's wonderful. How could anyone get angry?
Very good. Okay, well, there we go. Other members of the board win?
I move we waive the public hearing.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Mary Beth, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we have waived the public hearing. At which point, I'll ask for a motion for a resolution.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a first and a second, and we have a resolution. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, there you go. Okay, boy, we are flying tonight. Very nice. Okay, with that, we'll move on to the Nanini property, which also befuddles me because it's really not a subdivision, but Kristen, why don't we go ahead and start from the top on that? Where's Kristen?
Sure.
I lost Kristen. Oh, there she is. Okay.
When I talk, I'll move to the top of your screen, I think. So this application is, as we talked about previously, we're going from 3 lots down to 2. From a practical perspective, really a lot line shift, but from a zoning code perspective, actually considered a minor subdivision for the purposes of the town's subdivision regulations. Everything is conforming with zoning. Single-family houses are permitted as of right. The agricultural use is not, I don't believe, being changed at all. That's also permitted as of right. No zoning, no setbacks are being impacted, no ground disturbance at all. Again, the only thing that I wanted to note is that Blue Star Farm Lane, which is currently a private road, it serves, thank you very much, Dominic.
I get there eventually. Try.
Yes, Blue Star Farm Lane Road, excuse me, as you can see on the subdivision plan, currently serves 2 of the lots. And so that is currently a private road that is being converted to a driveway to only serve what you're seeing on here is lot 2. That should be a condition of your action because that impacts a lot area, as your lot area is defined, or lot area must subtract areas in private roads, but not a driveway, of course. So this lot 2, is just meets the minimum, so they'd have to convert that, which they are proposing to do. So no impacts, just for the record, want to reflect that that has to be extinguished in order for the lot to meet the minimum lot area. In terms of seeker, this is an unlisted action. I did prepare a draft negative declaration for your consideration. We see no additional environmental impacts. We did go through in our memo, went through some of the yes answers in the EAF that was provided in the part 1 EAF that was provided. Bats, of course, are listed as a potential impact, and there's no vegetation, no mature vegetation being removed, so we don't see any impacts there.
Okay, for the record, do we have to consider a public hearing prior to accepting the draft on neg deck?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you do. Cornwall, Town of Cornwall subdivision regulations require a public hearing on all subdivision applications, whether or not they're considered to be minor or major. So similar to the process that the board recently followed with the Doug Land Blackrock Forest re-subdivision, that this would require a public hearing.
Okay, Kristen, I apologize for interrupting you.
No, that's okay.
Did you have more to add?
No, nothing further.
Okay, Mark?
My comments under 1 just confirm what Kristen indicated. It was my review that indicated it was in fact a decrease in lot count and not truly a creation of a new lot, as we normally call a subdivision. Relative to the Blue Star Farm Road, I did pose the question to the applicant's consultant if they,
by the way.
yeah, I'm looking for you to give an answer potentially at the end of this comment.
Jim?
As to, since that driveway or that private road not only served the residents, which is, I believe, either in the process of being raised or has been removed, but it also served as access, convenient access to the rear barns in the storage areas to the far north, which will now be part of the lands to the west. If they continue to want to take benefit of that access, if that was the case, they would have to rethink the removal of the Blue Star Farm Road and change lot lines to make the lot that's being remained as a single-family residence, make that comply with zoning. So Jim, maybe you could tell us what the disposition of that is.
Well, thank you, Mark and Kristen, for doing such a great job explaining all this to me, but I really do need to talk so I can properly bill my client. But you're absolutely 100% correct. We got 3 lots here now. Tax lot 105, which is where all the Christmas trees are. We're all familiar with that. And then tax lot 38.2, which is the piece Bobby and and Leslie bought from Lucille Cox. And then the third piece is lot 16.1, which has a derelict house on it, which was owned by Wayne Clark, who is the son of Russell Clark and Lucille. So, and that house is a disaster, and Bobby has a demolition permit in hand that was issued last week by Gary. So that house will be torn down in the very near future. And it needs to be torn down because it's on a separate lot, and if the house were to remain, it would need obviously access out to Angola. Now, tax lot 38.2 will be shrunk down to be only a lot around the existing house that Liebman and Bob and Leslie's daughter and her husband, they live in there now. And Kristen correctly knows, and Mark also, that Blue Star Farm Road is a private road. And of course, the area of the private road would have to be removed from the removed from the gross area of the lot, and it would have 2 acres net. However, Bob is and Leslie are of the opinion that with the elimination of lot 16.1, and because 38.2, where the barn is in the back there, will be annexed to the main piece, that they don't need that private road anymore. They don't want it. So they will have to create like a 20 or 25-foot private easement over that driveway, if for no other reason than the utilities. The electric is underground from the existing poles out on Angola. It runs along that driveway to the house on what we call here lot 2, and then continues on back all the way back to the barn garage in the rear. So they want to eliminate that private road and just create a 20 or 25-foot easement over the existing driveway. Now, if lot 2 ever passes outside of the family, if Lee ever moves out of there and they decide they don't want it anymore, well, then they would extinguish that access, and Bob would have to continue to use direct access from lot 105 over to 38.2. That way they can keep lot 2 just 2 acres. It would include the area of what is now Blue Star Farm Road. Does that answer your question? Sort of a long rambling.
It answers the question, but it also raises the issue that easements are also an area subtracted from lot areas. So, and I believe the private road definition doesn't distinguish between lots and houses. So if it provides legal access to the back of lot 10, what's going to be 105, it may still constitute a private road. So my suggestion is that this all be resolved with your client before you submit plans for the public hearing.
That's correct. It should be. And I'll, of course, revise the map to eliminate the reference to lot 1 and lot 2 and the word subdivision, and just call it the lot line change.
But the board should be aware that the line will have to move if there's even a utility easement, because that would be an area subtraction as well, I believe, from definition, unless
Right,
I've lost.
that certainly can be done. There's certainly room enough area-wise on this piece to
Plenty of room.
a little bit bigger.
Planning
So
board,
that was-
are you all sufficiently confused about this conversation? Bill, you okay on this? Bill? Sorry?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm okay with this.
Okay, I think the only action we can take is schedule the public hearing, and Mark, you et al. Will meet with Jim and whoever else.
I think between Kristen, Dominic, and myself and Jim, we'll have to agree that the final version that's going to be presented for the public hearing checks all the boxes and does what's required. That's why I raised that as part of my comment 1, because I did have a conversation between the workshop and this meeting with Jim to discuss some issues. That was one of them. My second comment raises the issue of ensuring that the well and sanitary system remain on the correct property, which Jim has kindly shown that they are on the correct property. And because we have had cases where lot line changes have been shown that created a problem, but Jim has done a good job to make sure that the plans ensure that that's not occurring. So I think it's ready for authorization of a public hearing with the understanding that Jim has to talk to his client, and the final version of the lines around what's now shown as lot 2, but will be lot 38.2, Jim?
Correct. Lot 2 would become a new, smaller version of 38.2.
That configuration may be adjusted slightly based on the final use of access and utilities through that lot.
Okay,
Neil,
With
I have
That's all
something
I have.
quick. Neil, I have something quick.
sure.
Jim, this is pretty minor, but the hash marks that are being used for the property line to be eliminated around 16-.1, it kind of changes. I think you mean to extinguish the one that's on the left side there as well.
Correct, that's right.
Yeah, but it's showing a different type of hashing there. And we're kind of sharing the same hashing between the eliminated and the remaining. And I just think, I think always for clarity on these property line changes, we had the same thing on the Storm King Golf set of plans. It's always good, I think, if those are distinguished, there's two very different types of hashing used for the things that are going away and the things that are staying behind. I just had a little trouble sorting it out when I was going through it, that's all. So
Right.
pretty minor stuff. I think it's a great plan, but I just, you know, if we're going to go back around again with the public, rather than having the public ask a lot of questions because of that, I think if it's clearer, that'd be great.
Very good, Len.
If I might add one more thing, the house that's coming down, you know, the demolition permit was just issued last week. I can't speak for Bob as to when he's going to be taking that house down. Obviously, it has to come down as part of this application, and probably should be made a condition that it come down sooner than later. I don't know, that's just a thought. Maybe I'm thinking too much here.
I think you're correct. I think as part of any, I mean, certainly like the timing of the removal of that house is entirely up to the Naninis, but as far as the ability to, you know, authorize the filing of a new plat, you know, I think the house would have to be gone before like any new plat would be filed and reconfiguring those lots.
It would be nice to have a final map with no house there. I mean, the house gone.
Correct.
That would be.
I agree, that'd be way cleaner, Jim, and probably better for the owners when they're all done.
Correct.
Yeah, that could be handled as a condition of the approval, you know, because it's really a question of subtraction rather than something that has to change at that time. But speaking of public hearings, if the board's considering a public hearing for its August meeting for this application, just a couple things to note. It would appear that it would be in the best interest for Mr. Clearwater to provide the revisions to the plans that we've been discussing tonight, so that it's clear to the public what exactly is occurring out there. The authorization to hold public hearings during the pandemic, you know, has been subject to the governor's executive orders. The most current executive orders that have related to public hearings is actually expiring tomorrow. There are 47 executive orders that have been issued so far over the last several months by Governor Cuomo. And the executive order that's expiring tomorrow is the one that says that you can hold public hearings during the pandemic, but you must provide the ability for the public to participate by video or teleconference. I expect that this order is actually not going to expire, that it's going to be extended or modified, and the executive orders drop sometimes in the middle of the night. So as far as the mechanics is concerned of any public hearing that's coming up, we'll have to see what restrictions or authorization is in place at that time. I have to note that absent the ability to do what we're doing here with Zoom, right now, you know, public hearings cannot occur unless we provide video or teleconferencing. So
Any resolution to authorize a public hearing then should be conditioned on the extension of the governor's executive order, then I assume.
Yeah. So, or the restrictions that would be in place at the time of the hearing, because obviously this has been an evolving situation with rules that continue to evolve with the situation.
Dominic, you're going to hear me say this for the first time in many years on this board, but do we have the option of waiving the public hearing in this case? Because given that there's no change in access, there's only a decrease in use, there's no change in the drainage or traffic. I mean, I'm just trying to think through the whole list that we usually review, and this particular project does not have any increases in demand on the adjacent property owners or any of that. And so I just wasn't sure if that's possible in this case.
I agree with your opinions regarding the project, and unfortunately, this is one area where the town of Cornwall code does not allow the planning board to waive public hearing. Like in the other instances that have come before you even tonight that give the board discretion to waive public hearing, this is not one of them as presently written.
Very good, thanks.
That being said, I'll take a motion to authorize a public hearing conditioned on the governor's extension of the public hearing rules and regs over the internet.
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Did I hear a second?
Aye. Oh, second. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. We now have a public hearing. Okay, David? Where are David? Or John? Where? I'm losing everybody on my screen here. Okay, with that, we have a scheduled public hearing next month conditioned on what I said before with the governor's plan. Okay, with that, we'll move on to Star Warehouse.
Thank you, everyone.
Dominic, did we do seeker for the subdivision?
No, typically that'd be handled at the time of the approval.
Do we want to have Dominic draft a finding for the neg deck at this time so that we're ready if there's no action on the public hearing, as I suspect it will not be, that we can move expeditiously?
I drafted one. I drafted a neg deck.
So we'll have that to consider after the public hearing next month.
That's correct. Kristen already drafted a proposed negative declaration, and to keep things moving, I would prepare a resolution of approval.
Very good.
Okay, with that, we can move on to Star Warehouse.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night, Jim.
Good night.
Is the representative from Star Warehouse with us?
Yes, evening. This is Vince Peterzak. How are you doing this evening?
Hello.
Since we were last here before you for the 50,000 square foot additional storage facility to go on to the existing building, no additional office space or bathrooms, we've worked diligently to try to figure out a way to resolve the scenario with the fire suppression. Originally, we were thinking about putting a swimming pool underneath the 50,000 square foot addition. Since then, we've looked at and analyzed putting tanks under the ground, putting tanks above ground with a building around them. We looked at utilizing the existing lagoon, putting a tank in a lagoon, putting a impervious liner in a lagoon, and when all the numbers were crunched and all the analysis were done, we ended up with a 250,000 gallon water tower. The placement of the tower is at a location where it could easily tie into the existing piping for the system that comes out of the lagoon currently and can service both buildings at this time. So we're back before you. We thought we would have a workshop to discuss it first, but we're pleased to be back before the planning board to discuss how we can move this along further.
Well, with that, why don't we go to Kristen's comments? Kristen?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm not sure if I should start because I really was not around for the earlier iterations of this application. So
Fair point, Kristen. We'll go to Mark. I apologize. You're correct.
That's fine.
I, because of that fact, with Kristen just getting the enjoyment of joining us on this application, I under comment 1 and looking at the file, pulled together some of the history. The project was sent to county planning. It'll be up to the board, and I think some recommendations from Kristen and Dominic as to whether or not the updated plan that is, let's say, 3-4 years newer will need to be resent to the county planning under GML 239. So that's just a procedural status item. Seeker, Dominic, and Kristen can go on with further discussion. This project did receive a positive declaration in January of 2017, and that positive deck was circulated on January 4th, 2017. So that's should also be discussed procedurally following my comments. We did receive a somewhat lengthy letter from New York State DEC in September of 2016 that should be considered. We did have some SWIP comments from November of 2016 that should be considered and may need to be updated depending upon the resubmittal that we anticipate receiving. And one other issue raised back years ago was the fact that there was a concern and the need for some serious coordination with Central Hudson Gas and Electric because there's a high pressure gas main apparently running through the site. So we need to make sure that that is coordinated with that particular public utility. Comment 2, I'm not going to go through each of the comments in detail, but it's kind of a reiteration of the areas of concern that were discussed in the initial reviews. We had asked that the plan more accurately reflect the conditions on the site. I know back 3 years ago, I met at the site with the applicant's engineer. There were a number of inconsistencies. They have, let's say, updated the plan, but I don't know that it was updated to what's in 2020 or 3 years ago. So the applicant's engineer should make sure that their latest field review, perhaps if they did it 3 years ago, they check again to make sure that the existing conditions are in fact truly existing and as-built conditions. Parking was a concern. There were in fact some discrepancies between what was shown and what existed. That's another area they should make sure is properly reflected on the plans. They are in this application continuing to request both proposed spaces and some land bank spaces. So we can review that further as we have more submittal information. The emergency access drive, which was a consideration of both our review and the fire inspector's review, has been updated based on some comments, but it's my understanding that the fire inspector has in fact asked for recently some additional modification to the details, so that should be addressed. Project entry sign out on Route 32. We did discuss that in detail 3-4 years ago. It is detailed on the plan. They have provided dimensions such that the code enforcement officer can verify if the dimensions meet the code. But as well, we had specifically asked that the sign be internally illuminated. I don't see that on the plan. Relative to the access off 32, there has been concern about a safe and proper access to the site with the center island being removed and full turning movements and signage on 32 being provided for, let's call it, adequate notification to trucks as to where the turn is so that they can safely enter and not have to do U-turns having passed the entrance. That would be subject to DOT review, and that is another area that we'll have some further review on. Vince spoke of the water supply and fire protection. They are showing a 250,000 gallon water tower on the south side of the site, this site, central to the overall site. We still need to have quite a bit of information relative to system pressures, adequate fire flows to service both buildings, both something that I had asked for and the fire inspector's office recently confirmed their interest in. And a prior comment was sanitary disposal. We asked that the applicant verify via some letter report or analysis that the existing system is reviewed for adequacy and proper operation. So we are waiting on that, I believe, as well. So all those things are relevant concerns, given the fact that a project has been positive, has received a positive declaration. I will leave it to Kristen and Dominic to speak as to scoping and how each of these areas of concern could be included in the evaluation. And that's
Thank you,
all I'll
Mark.
speak to.
Thank you, Mark. Kristen? You have-
Sure. So I'll just weigh in briefly on the kind of preliminary stuff. The project, I mean, everything, because we haven't heard it since 2016. The project is in the PIO zoning district. The one change since 2016 with respect to zoning is that the town board's actions in 2020, the zoning modifications that were adopted by the town board do impact this project in that they have removed the ability for truck terminals to be permitted in the zone. So it previously said, and you can see on the applicant's site plan, that the use that they have is truck terminals and general warehousing. Truck terminals are no longer permitted as of the 2020 zoning modifications by the town board. There's not a definition in the zoning of general warehousing, so we might need a little bit of clarification on the use from Gary, but the applicant is going to have to figure out if this impacts them. So they're going to have to come up with some kind of narrative with Gary and figure out if any part of what was proposed to be in this expansion is, if it's still permitted, if it's not permitted, and Gary's going to have to provide some insight on that with respect to zoning. Otherwise, general warehousing, which is still permitted, is subject to use group C, and it appears from the zoning table that the building footprint at least meets all of the zoning, the dimensional requirements, and nothing has changed in the building size since 2016. We had some minor comments as we're I was assuming that this is going to be the first of several submittals, and we'll get some additional information as we go. But wetland mapping should be updated. As you can see, the Woodbury Creek runs along the back of the property. Federal wetlands will need to be, at least the date can be, the date of the delineation needs to be on the plan so that we can confirm that it doesn't need to be updated. In terms of seeker, Mark did touch on this. The application, a positive declaration was adopted on this application, which requires the preparation of an environmental impact statement. The next step in the process would be for the applicant to prepare a draft scoping document. That can be prepared with by reviewing the part 1 and the part 2 and looking at the yes answers and kind of start from there, and then circulated to our offices and to the board for review. And I don't have anything else.
Thank you, Kristen. Dominic, did you have any comments to add to Kristen's?
Yeah, no, that was a really good summary. You know, I would just reiterate that, can you hear me okay? I had a microphone issue.
Nope, you're set.
Okay, so, you know, in terms of like the next step in the seeker process, because the board adopted a positive declaration and required scoping, which at that time was discretionary, but has since become mandatory as part of the seeker regulations, is the next step would be for the applicant to actually prepare a draft scope. And that's necessary in order for the project to move forward through the process. We haven't received a draft scope yet, so the applicant, you know, isn't able to formally move forward, but nonetheless, they did submit these plans because they're looking for feedback as to solving some of these technical issues. So it's helpful in that regard. But in terms of the board being able to take any additional steps at this point, there's nothing that's technically in front of the board for any action to consider at this time. Of course, any comments that the board may have, I think will be helpful for the applicant. And so please share anything that you may have in that regard. Kristen also touched on the zoning amendments that were recently conducted by the town. And so my recommendation there is consistent with hers, is that it would be helpful for the applicant to provide a narrative of the proposed warehouse storage addition and how that will function, as Kristen suggested. And that can be reviewed at a preliminary level by the building inspector, and he can review it to see whether or not there's a need for an interpretation or variances or anything else that may be required. And I think that that's an initial preliminary matter, because that will affect the potential processing of this application.
That was excellent, Dominic. Thanks. Well, since there is no action that we can possibly take tonight, but I'll ask any board member with any input to say so. I'll start with Led. Led, you over there?
Yep, I am. And I only have two relatively minor sort of technical issues. The first is, Mark, it was my understanding that the existing 185,000 square foot warehouse building had some ongoing fire prevention issues. The last time we reviewed this project, I remember that the applicant was working to resolve those. I did not know if those had been resolved. But I would like to propose to the applicant that given the scope of those previous problems and the access on Route 32, that it might be worthwhile to think about a phased approach here, where as the first phase in the work, the access to Route 32 is improved, and prior to any vertical construction beginning, that tank is in place. I'd very much like to see the fire prevention improvements made prior to vertical construction beginning on the 50,000 square foot warehouse. As we all know, the risk of fire increases during construction operations as opposed to afterwards. And if we're already having some compliance issues in the 185,000 square foot existing facility, then it would make sense to me that we bring that all into compliance and we prepare fire prevention for 50,000 square foot improvement prior to beginning to add more, basically fire demand to the site. And Mark, I'd welcome your input on that as well.
No, given the history from all the memoranda that I've seen generated from the fire inspector's office, it certainly is a legitimate approach and a valid consideration.
Yeah, and from my point of view, you know, the applicant could almost take that island out, like, you know, I mean, I'm not sure that the island is a necessary part of their current operation, and it certainly impedes proper traffic flow to and from the existing site, and it hurts our fire prevention. So I would encourage our building inspector to work with the applicant on perhaps pursuing some of those improvements sooner rather than later to improve our emergency access.
I think that would have to be part of a phase one on the plans, because the existing sign would be removed, and therefore you would need to approve the new sign before they can rip down the old one.
Yeah,
So,
that's fair. That's fair. But I'd love to see
again,
that tank. I'd love to see that tank go in and that turnaround get improved just as soon as it's possible for that to happen. And so a phased approach to me makes a certain amount of sense. And I just ask them to pursue that.
I think your suggestion that the access road, the access curb cut to 32, and the water storage tower and fire protection system as part of a phase one certainly will bring the site into a much safer condition before construction starts.
Yeah, and just, you know, you end up with stacks and stacks of material out there as construction is ongoing. And if we're already having fire prevention issues before we even start stacking all that material out there, I'd hate to see something happen during construction when there's all the welding and other types of operations that can lead to those fires taking place on the site. The second, Mark, and I'll just reemphasize, you mentioned the high pressure gas line through there. That's got to get addressed very quickly. And Kristen, I had one question for you. In terms of a truck terminal, you know, when I look at this, it doesn't look like a truck terminal to me, you know, as a non-zoning look. But I'm wondering, is there any technical language defining what constitutes a truck terminal? I mean, do we have to be at more than 10 bays or more than 20 bays or something like that, or so many bays per square foot?
No, zoning is never what engineers want it to be, which is never quantifiable. I know how your engineering brain works, but unfortunately, the zoning code defines a truck terminal as a terminal which allows for the lease, repair, maintenance, and temporary storage of trucks, which would not generally occur at a warehouse. So You can take that for what it's worth, and we can ask Gary about what he believes that to entail.
Okay.
It doesn't define it with number of bays.
So notes on the plan saying they're not intending to store or maintain vehicle trucks on the site would be helpful.
Yeah, if that's how the applicant wishes to address it, they can, address it through a narrative, address it at any way that they want, but that probably they're no longer allowed to do any of the things specifically mentioned in that definition of truck terminal.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because you know my preference for seeing it as a note on the plan rather than inside of some other document that's going to be difficult for the public to access if a neighbor begins to have trouble or a future building inspector begins to have some enforcement issue.
Understood.
If it's a note right on the plan, then it's just dead clear to everyone who can go down to Goshen and pull the plan.
Understood.
Okay,
And we have,
that's all.
we have
That's
no
all I got.
problem
Thanks,
on
Neil.
that.
Excellent comments, Len. Bill?
Yeah, all these comments that Mark made, they have to be addressed. Am I under that understanding that they have to be addressed?
Yes.
So is he planning going to a workshop to discuss this? The next workshop? Before we continue with, I mean, he's got a lot of items here he has to.
Yeah, those items will have to be addressed, yes. We're not taking any action tonight.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, not only do they need to be addressed on the site plan, but some, and I'll defer to Dominic and Kristen from a seeker standpoint, how they're going to be handled from seeker needs to also be resolved. I listed all that under comment 1 to help bring everyone up to 2020 from 2016. I'm going to step back on the procedural issues and let Kristen lead the way on the county and on the seeker issues. So perhaps Kristen could work with the applicant on, once they submit a scope, which items necessitate being addressed in seeker as well as on the plans.
Yeah, that would be fine. I don't mind reviewing a draft scope, but the applicant has to prepare it first, and I'll review it being provided.
Absolutely.
Very good. Thank you. Bill, you have,
Excuse me?
Bill, do you have other comments?
No, I was just wanting to get some clarification on this because before we can go any further, I think these should be addressed at the
Correct.
start.
You're correct. Okay, with that, Mary Beth?
I have nothing. Everyone covered it. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mary Beth. Win?
Yeah, I got a couple of things. First of all, Led hit the high points on my concerns about fire protection, and I will agree with him that I'd like to see that issue resolved sooner rather than later. There's been a history of lack of cooperation, and I think that we need to make that a condition of approval. The other question I have, and it may be for Mark rather than anyone else. I mean, I live out here. I drive past there probably 4 times a week. Has any consideration been given to creating a turning lane for access to the site off of Route 32? I can't tell you how many times I've seen tractor trailers going, especially north, and then slamming on their air brakes, leaving skid marks in order to get into that site.
Your observations and concerns were part of our discussions. We were not quite sure that the DOT would allow a turn lane, but we sure as heck believed that they would not disagree with perhaps some warning signs or identification signs, entrance to, I don't recall the street address on Route 32, but, entrance to Star Warehouse properties, whatever it may be, 1,000 feet or 1,500 feet. So those were some of the discussions but yes, we were concerned about safe entrance to that curb cut.
We spend a lot of time talking about projects on 9W and 32 about sightlines. Right past that entrance is a daycare center. And look, I live there. I've lived there for 40 years. I know what's there, and I know what speed I can travel safely. But it scares me to death that there's going to be a tractor trailer piling into that daycare center because they just barely missed the turn.
No, I understood, and that was part of our concern. And unfortunately, what we believe is appropriate and what we want may not be what the DOT approves, but we sure as all heck are going to raise the concern and ask for the best possible solution.
Thank you.
Years ago, there were signs. I mean, I'm going back in time, show my age. There were signs when Star Expansion was 24/7, and there were signs posted in both directions, notifying everyone, all drivers, that there was that facility. So I'm just wondering if maybe the DOT could go, if you're discussing that, could go back in their archives to be able to pull that information up as to what the distance was where they had them posted, and to be able to maybe reinstate them.
No, your memory is accurate. I remember those signs as well. So I hope that the DOT in 2020 sees the same wisdom they did in years past.
Very good. Excellent comments by all members of the board. Thank you. But with that, Vince, you have I guess you have a shopping list of things that Vince still here?
Yes, I'm still here.
Oh, okay. You have a bit of a shopping list to follow up on, and I'm sure you can be in contact with Mark and Kristen to help clarify some of the, if you have any questions.
Yeah, definitely. I was wondering if it makes sense to send out for the county planning review again at this point.
I can address that, Mr. Chairman. At this point, and so the county, did provide initial comments on this project, but a full statement that's required to be referred to the county will include the seeker documents themselves. So at every step of the process,
Okay.
Along seeker, including the scope, would also get sent to the county. I mean, if you want, to send them the comments at this point, or excuse me, rather your plans at this point, we could do so, but we'd also have to let them know that there's no scope as of yet, and that there will be additional technical changes that would be forthcoming. So without, responding to the prior county's comments, I'm not sure that that procedurally it makes sense to send it at this particular time.
Yeah, let's wait till we submit the scoping document.
Okay, very good. So Vince, are you all set?
Yes, thank you very much. Have a
Okay.
wonderful evening.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to the Storm King Art Center. Do we have anybody here from Storm King Art Center? Thanks, Vince.
I think you have everybody here from Storm King
There's a
Arts
few
Center.
people here from Storm King Art Center.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you? Thank you for having us.
Very good.
Just a reminder, I'm Amy Weiser, and we're glad to be back before you. In advance of this evening, we submitted to you the traffic impact and access study and the parking study that was prepared by our engineers, VHB. And tonight, Wendy Holzberger, a partner at VHB, and our traffic engineer will walk you through that, and Valerie Monestra, our principal planner from Nelson Pope and Voorhees, will talk about next steps. I also want to acknowledge that we also have here Mike Tucker of VHB, Ron Kosser, our attorney, and several of my colleagues, Anthony Davidovitz, Rachel Coker, Jessica Burke, and if there's anybody on my team I forgot, please accept my apologies. And then my only other responsibility here, other than to take your questions at the end, is just to briefly review the principles of the master plan overall, in case summer rain has caused that to, jump out of yours. To give context for Wendy's report, our master plan gives priority to improvements that address the most urgent needs, such as reducing the impact of traffic on the surrounding community, preserving the on-site visitor experience, and ensuring an effective work environment for our staff to support our mission, our collection, and our artists. And I just want to remind you of the 3 design principles that Paul presented when we were here 2 months ago. The first is to remove cars and traffic from the heart of Storm King's site. And this is accommodated by consolidating the service-intensive uses at the edge of the site with the most direct access possible to the exterior road network, and by providing the consolidated lot that Wendy will walk us through in the north part of the site. The second principle, which that lot really makes possible, But the increase in our parking spots is to reclaim land in the center of the site that is presently used for parking, for sculpture and for art, and thereby for our visitors. And then the third is a landscape principle, which is really about making sure that in all the work we do, we really preserve what is so important about Storm King for our visitors and for the community of Cornwall, in terms of putting the trees and the new infrastructure into the tree line so that the Storm King landscape shines better and better each time. And as I was thinking about coming here today specifically to talk to you about traffic and parking, I really thought about how that's where this project started for us. These topics that we're bringing to you today are really integral. This change from having our visitors pay and then park to park and then pay enables all of this other change to happen. And by doing so, we believe it reduces demand on town roads during peak periods and improves the on-site experience for our visitors. So we are nearly doubling the number of marked parking spots. We are privileging and promoting the use of public transportation, thereby reducing parking demand. We're streamlining entry, thereby reducing the potential for backup on town roads. And by dispersing some services to the south end of the site, we're also reducing the traffic on Orrs Mills Road. So with that as introduction, I think Wendy will pick up here.
Okay, thank you. Wendy?
Yep. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you are.
All right. So again, Wendy Holzberger from VHB. And I'm gonna review the traffic evaluation, and then I'll go into the parking study that we did. And just as Amy had talked about, in the last several years, Storm King has done a lot to reduce the visitor impact on the local road system, and they have will continue to their marketing efforts and discount incentives to help promote ride sharing and increase use of the public transportation. But knowing that we did, we completed a traffic study to actually look at the impacts on the offsite roadway network. I am going to share my screen if you don't mind, because I have a couple visuals to kind of help walk us through this. I have a lot of screens. So hopefully, can you see the screen? Is it coming up?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Got it.
It's always hard to tell what everyone can see when you can't see it on the backside.
Everybody was looking at my Facebook before.
Yeah, sorry. Well, after they did that, I was really careful to check my screen just so you know something. So one thing I just wanted to point out is this project is a little bit not typical than our typical development project where we would complete a traffic impact assessment, because what Storm King is proposing as part of their master plan is really not a direct traffic generator. And, most of our studies are, here's a site, we're going to put a pharmacy there, put an apartment building, and, there's no trips, and now we're going to have new trips there. So, this isn't a site that actually what's being proposed is actually generating traffic. As Amy referred to it, the purpose of it is to really improve the visitor experience, and some of that does have to do with traffic and the flow internally and making it a better experience for the patrons, but it isn't really like they're building something that's going to increase traffic. However, Storm King has experienced growth, over the last decade, and they expect that growth to continue. So what we've done kind of in replacement of our typical trip generation is in that future condition, we have looked at the growth over the years and kind of projected that growth to continue. So, we have added additional, Storm King traffic onto the roadway network. But again, just to point out, it's not a typical study that we did, but understanding that, the offsite and how people enter and exit the site is part of that overall experience and something that Storm King is very much focused on. We have completed this offsite analysis. So our study area on this map here, in the blue, the primary study area, focused on the Orrs Mills Road intersection, what we called our primary, which is Orrs Mills with Pleasant Hill Road. Station Road, really because of its proximity to Old Pleasant Hill Road, and then Route 32 with Orrs Mills Road. these were the primary focus based on the changes to the parking and the access of the primary site. The pink intersections here were added on as secondary intersections, and that kind of came to fruition when the master plan expanded to include additional potential parking as a phase 2 in the south end of the site at Bunny Road. So when those intersections were added as Route 32 and Quaker Avenue, Angola Road with Pleasant Hill Road and Route 32, and then also Junger Road and Bunny Road. We did, because 2 of those kind of secondary intersections are on Route 32. We did actually include those 2 intersections in kind of our primary phase 1 assessment, because that really made sense to do that. So typical to a traffic assessment, we looked at certain peak periods. Again, not as typical to some studies which really focus on commuter peak periods. Storm King, we focused on kind of the peak operating conditions of the site itself. So we looked actually at 4 different peak periods, 2 during a weekday where we looked at kind of a midday at 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. as one period, which is after the typical commuter period, because Storm King is not operational during that commuter peak. So we looked at kind of when the site opens, and then we did look at a PM weekday, which we looked at between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And that is the one period that does kind of coincide with some of that more typical peak commuter period. We also looked at a weekend, looked at a Saturday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. and then again at 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the afternoon. At these primary intersections, the 4 blue ones, we conducted counts in October of 2018, which is really during the peak Storm King season. The Saturday that we did counts was the second highest day of the operating year. So that really gives us a worst case assessment of that offsite traffic on the roadway network. The pink ones, which like I said, were added later, were actually counted earlier this year in February. And then what we did was we utilized the data that we had collected during that peak operational season, and then we adjusted the volumes at those secondary intersections to elevate that base condition to mimic that peak operating condition. And just to note, so we're looking at kind of that worst case, highest peak season. So during other times of the year, the results and like the impact in the Storm King traffic on that roadway network would actually be less. So.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
So on page 8 under your existing conditions, table 2, you're talking about Ores Mill Road East and Ores Mill Road West. Are those counts including, I mean, that's not including traffic on 32, that's just Ores Mill Road, correct?
Right. So those volumes, those are when I said east and west, that was actually east of Old Pleasant Hill Road and west of Old Pleasant Hill Road. So that's daily volumes, but both direction 24-hour counts. And then we actually break that table down and to show what's happening during the peak periods as well. And the reason we did that was to kind of see the distribution of traffic. So, looking at it on both sides of that entrance, can tell us, a kind of the flow of traffic as they're coming in and out of the site.
That would also capture the left turning movements. I mean, the one I'm mainly asking, the reason I'm asking this question is because left turning movements off of Route 32 onto Ores Mill Road during the peak generated could end up backing up traffic on Route 32. And so we don't have a traffic count here of, like how many northbounders or how many southbounders on Route 32 at that key intersection. And again, my specific concern is, let's say that, on a Saturday morning at 10 a.m., we got 30 people trying to make a left onto Ores Mill Road from Route 32. They would definitely obstruct northbounders on Route 32 during that period back to that iron bridge there. Everybody knows it crosses the Mudna. So I'm just wondering, I just want to make sure that the traffic study is capturing that possibility. I mean, blocking up Ores Mill Road is an inconvenience. Blocking up Route 32 is a more serious consideration from a, sort of, if you want to call it an area-wide look. So I just was curious about that.
Yep. So that table 2 that you reference is actually where that's hourly, daily counts, just kind of the flow of traffic on Ores Mills Road. The intersection turning movement counts that you're referring to, we did actually capture as well. So those were the counts I referred to also in October of 2018. There's figures towards the end of the report that actually have, and that's the intersection analysis that we did. So there are exactly what you're looking for, where there's turning movement counts that show you the volume of traffic going straight and through at all of those study area intersections, both the blue and the pink intersections.
I suppose this is the part where I have to confess that I did not read the entire report.
You only looked at the beginning and didn't go to the end?
I thought I got it all in chapter 2, so thank
That's
you.
okay. No, that's perfectly fine. It's a good question because there's a lot of information and it is really hard to figure it all out. I totally understand.
On that, I'll just add that I'll be asking the board to authorize the hiring of Phil Greeley, our traffic consultant, to provide an analysis of the report. So rather than extraneous questions, we can have it from our own review. We'll be able to have some of those questions, I think, better answered.
Okay,
Yeah, what was that name
great.
again? I'm sorry. What was that name?
Phil Greeley.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know Phil Gurley. Got it.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so now I got to find my spot.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. So basically we did those counts, and then so that represents our existing condition. And again, for a typical traffic impact study, we then look at a future condition, what we call no build, which is before a project is developed, kind of knowing that there's other growth that occurs on a roadway network. And then we look at a build condition, again, kind of atypical to this study where we're not having an exact trip generation. What we did was we considered the no build, which was, ancillary growth. And then for our build condition, we included that anticipated growth that Storm King has been seeing over time. So again, not contributed exactly to what, the master plan is producing, but just kind of understanding that Storm King has been increasing its attendance, and we're making that same assumption. Another thing to clarify is that primary phase 1, what we're calling with the improvements to the north parking lot, we analyze as a 2023 build condition, and then that secondary potential for phase 2, we analyze another 10 years out in that analysis, where we added in, again, it was just the Junger Road and the Bunny Road intersections are the ones that we only did for that extra 10-year out analysis. So some of the things we included in, once we got our existing 1-hour peak volumes at all of those intersections, to project the future volumes to the 2023 condition, we looked at growth on the roadway network, like I had said, and based on a review of historical volumes, Route 32 is really not experiencing growth, actually has been showing a little bit of a decline, but Ores Mills Road did have a slight increase in traffic. So to be conservative, we included a 0.5% growth rate over those years to get to the 2023, and then again included that same background growth when we went another 10 years. So that is, a bit conservative, assuming that there would be growth on those peak hour volumes. The town did not indicate any specific projects that would be added into that. So if there was a nearby project, we would also add that growth. But that 0.5% really does account for growth, since there's not really been a lot of growth that's been seen. In addition, like I said, when we went to that build condition, we had the growth on Storm King, which we took the Storm King volumes, which we had from the counts specific on Old Pleasant Hill, and followed them through the network. We increased by 7%, an increase to the 2023 year, and then another 2% through the 2033 year, knowing that growth had a higher end of growth in the beginning, and then it would kind of level off and be 2%. And that was based on, existing trends and kind of maximizing the growth to where Storm King thinks their attendance would really level off in the end. We also had accounted for that for the weekend peak, because we're looking at that peak period, understanding that Storm King, there's an overflow of parking, and like in 2019, Storm King had utilized Salisbury Mills parking as an off-site overflow parking area. Although that's not like a necessarily the same location for off-site parking that will be used as moving forward, Storm King understands that they will continue to find an offsite location for overflow. To have a place to put the cars, we did actually include that Salisbury Mills. So we actually distributed that overflow parking for that weekend, like I said, that peak into Salisbury Mills. If that location changes, it's not really going to change the results of the study. It's really showing of that dispersion of trips. So it's saying that that percentage of trips would be pulled off of Orrs Mills. So whether it's at Salisbury Mills or, you know, down the street or in another location, it's really not going to, that volume's not enough. It would change anything. It's just going to still show that it's pulling cars off of Orrs Mills Road. And the other thing that we included is they've done some study on increasing the usage of Metro North. So we looked at what the current use was there, and a study that was done that showed, you know, another 10% increase in that usage. So that volume was also accounted for in that build condition. So once we got the future volumes for, like, again, that 2023 year, we analyzed the intersections, the 6 intersections that we had talked about for the phase 1, using the highway capacity manual as the background, as the analysis software. What that does is it gives us a letter grade level of service between a level service A and an F, and it also gives average vehicle delay on approaches and overall for an intersection if it's a signalized intersection. Those letter grades are very similar to like a report card, where level service A represents the best conditions with the least amount of average vehicle delay, and it moves up to a level service F, which is the longer vehicle delay and the less desirable condition. So the focus of that analysis, really, the 3 intersections here on Orrs Mills Road operated at good levels of service with relatively low vehicle delays. These 2 here in the upper right at Route 32 in Orrs Mills and Quaker Avenue are the 2 I'm going to talk about a little bit more as I move forward. I'm going to just go to the next slide here. So the Orrs Mills Route 32 intersection did show, actually, in the existing and through those projected future conditions, that there was some long vehicle delays on this Orrs Mills Road approach for 3 of the 4 conditions. The one that it didn't show longer delays was that weekday midday, which makes sense because it's outside of that commuter peak. So generally traffic is lower on that intersection and just in general on the roadway network. So one thing to point out is just looking at this intersection, we looked at what the volume is associated with Storm King on that Orrs Mills Road approach. And for example, during the PM peak hours, only 16% of this approach volume is from Storm King, and 23% in that projected condition would be part of Storm King. So a lot of this intersection volume is not related directly to Storm King. And that we looked at because it is, and like I said, the existing condition there is showing some long vehicle delays on this approach. But we did look at mitigation here, and one of the things we looked at is the traffic signal warrants, which in order to install a signal at an intersection, there's certain criteria that has to be met in order for you to install a signal, which is that signal warrant criteria, which is outlined in the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. And so what we found is the peak hour conditions that we looked at, those 3 conditions, actually do meet the warrants in the existing condition. So one thing, it's in our report that there's a recommendation that a signal is actually warranted there. But like I said, because Storm King isn't like the predominant flow at that intersection, what Storm King is committed to, if DOT, the Department of Transportation, agrees that a signal needs to be installed at that intersection, Storm King is committed to partnering with the state and actually determining what that fair share would be to mitigate the actual impact that Storm King traffic has at that location. Similarly, down at the Quaker Ave intersection, this southbound left turn volume is high, and again experiencing some longer vehicle delays in those peak conditions. And one thing that was looked at here was the existing storage is about 275 feet. But if you look at the layout, there's a really pretty wide hatched area that goes all the way up through the bridge. And so it could be actually modified to provide a longer storage length, because the existing conditions right now go beyond the 275 feet for the average queue at this intersection during those peak periods. So our recommendation is to extend that queue into this hatched area to about 700 feet. So that would accommodate the existing queues and the future queues in that 2023 design year that we were talking about.
Yeah, but I don't know how much that would change. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I don't know how much that would change your counts though, because people already queue there. So when you were making your counts, there were probably already people queuing in that hashed space.
But I think that queue, they're using it for southbound. I think what Wendy might be alluding to is making it available for the northbound. Am I correct, Wendy?
Well, it's kind of a combination. So we're extending the storage area to this southbound, because you are correct that right now some of the left turn vehicles are queuing, outside of that left turn lane, because the storage during those peak periods is longer than the storage that's provided now. So by extending that storage lane, it's allowing for those left turners to store in this lane. So when the signal has a protected phase, then they're allowed to, they're in their right lane to make that movement. Up at this intersection at Orrs Mills, right now there's 2 through lanes. And if a signal is installed there, the left turn lane, which is kind of part of one of the comments before, it would be restriped so that there was an actual left turn lane and then 1 through lane. You wouldn't keep like the 2 through lanes at that intersection if you installed a signal. So that would allow for a protected left-hand movement as well. So it would flow better. So this would really be, there already are 2 lanes going through there. It would kind of be reconfiguring that. And to this southbound, it would be providing additional storage so that the number of vehicles trying to store in this lane would be satisfied, and both in existing. So similar to what we said here, Storm King is again committed that if the department is agreeing that a change like this needs to be made, they want to contribute towards, what traffic is Storm King, adding to that system to help mitigate that traffic.
Wendy, one thing that I brought up before, and I don't know whether this is something that is relevant to this particular discussion. By the time a car gets to Quaker Avenue, they have passed, coming north on 32, they've passed the last bail point if Storm King is at capacity. Has any consideration been given to a variable data sign someplace south of Quaker Avenue to direct traffic away from Route 32 if they're not going to be able to get into Storm King?
So one of the things right now that Storm King is focusing on is a lot of web-based advertising and trying to promote the off-site lot. So when they used that off-site lot at Salisbury Mill last year, there was a lot of promoting of that and pre-ticketing and offering discounts and incentives if you bought your ticket ahead of time, so that so when you're traveling to Storm King, you already know that you're not going to go to Storm King's site itself. So it has been discussed, I think, as a secondary. I mean, we're hoping that, the increased advertising and on the web is actually going to help with that issue. But as a secondary thing, we are looking at the potential that if it's needed, signs could be installed, but that would require, I mean, it's a state roadway, so, it would require permits from the state and the county. So
I'm not trying to be argumentative.
Oh no, absolutely.
But I'm not going to check the web as I'm driving up Route 32 from Brooklyn.
Right.
I live in Mountainville, and I think I'm probably the only one on the planning board who does. And I'm also a member of Storm King and a supporter. So I'm not trying to make your life miserable.
Oh no, I don't think you are at all. It's a good question. And like I said, that's something that is kind of a secondary that it's been discussed. But we are
just as food for thought. I think there would be value to variable data signs both south of Quaker and also south of Angola Road, because that's another bail point, again, I'm not trying to pin you down, but I just want you to factor this into your thinking as you do traffic studies, because once you get past Quaker, you got no place to bail. So you either make a left on Ores Mills Road or you go to Five Corners.
Mhm.
So
There
when,
there aren't many options in between.
Amy, did you have a, Amy,
Yeah.
do you have a comment?
thank you. So when we really did note you saying that last time, and you know what's interesting right now, and the work that Anthony and his team are doing right now on site, according to the very beginning of this meeting, is we're really going to learn a huge amount about advanced ticketing, and I've had experience at a site that made extraordinary use of advanced ticketing and keep showing on peak days that you absolutely had to have an advanced ticket. So we're hoping that as people ticket more in advance, they use the internet more in advance, there will be opportunities to message them as they're delivered their ticket. Here's where you are going. You can control the traffic flow it that way with those tools, as well as use that advanced ticketing to sort of flatten the peaks. So I don't know who's cleaning the table at the same time, but maybe they could go on mute. So that we have the opportunity to say to people, you know what, Saturday, October 13th at 1 o'clock, we cannot accommodate you, but we can accommodate you at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or so I think your signage idea is totally something in the mix, but we're also hoping that we literally head them off at the pass by not even having people head out to Storm King unless they know that they can get access.
I think that's fabulous. Because I live in Mountainville, I mean, I know all the ways around getting caught in traffic on a Saturday when the leaves are turning, but I don't live in Brooklyn. I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Point well taken. Thank you.
Okay, Wendy?
Yep. So any more, is there another question, or you want me to move on? Okay, all right, I'll move on. So the other thing we looked at was, I wasn't at the meeting, but I know the board had requested us to look at Jackson Avenue. So we have taken a qualitative look at that intersection, again, focusing on the traffic from Storm King that could go through this intersection during the peak season. And based on the traffic from Storm King and the distribution from our data collection, in that 2023 condition, during the weekdays, there's only 2 to 11 vehicles that would travel through this intersection during the weekday peaks, which equates to about 1 vehicle every 5 to 20 minutes. During the Saturday, it's a little bit higher with about 27 to 43 vehicles, which equates to one trip every 1.5 to 2 minutes. So looking at that, the kind of the industry guidelines based on the Institute of Transportation Engineers and also the Department of Transportation, kind of our guideline to needing to look at an intersection in more detail is the generation of about 100 trips on any intersection approach. So it really didn't warrant looking at it any further, and the traffic from Storm King really can be handled at this intersection. And just one thing to point out, those numbers that I said are really, it's not on one approach. It's like 27 and some are coming, some are going, some are coming from the north south, so it's really dispersed through that intersection. And that did include when we did our assessment, because like I said, even though we don't know if Salisbury Mills would be utilized as a future offsite lot to kind of do this worst case assessment, there could be a potential to have 3 shuttle buses in each direction, 3 shuttles on each approach, and that was included in those numbers that we talked about. So based on our look at this intersection, the traffic can be handled at this intersection without any mitigation. The other thing that we had looked at, again, which I think the board had brought up, was looking at kind of the cross section of Ores Mills Road itself. And we did, look at the cross section. It's got 10 to 12 foot lanes with 3 to 5 foot shoulders, and it really is consistent with the cross section of other similar type roadways. The other things that we looked at was a left turn. The left turn lane warrants from westbound on Ores Mills Road onto Old Pleasant Hill Road. And that criteria is similar to a traffic signal. Is there certain criteria that you look at, which that criteria for a left turn lane is based on warrants that are presented by the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. And looking at those warrants for the 4 peaks that we looked at, only like only one of the peak periods, met those warrants, which really doesn't trigger the need to put in that left turn lane. So we're not making a recommendation for changes to this cross section or a left turn lane. Because again, that one that did meet it was based on the Saturday peak, which is the second highest day of the year. So, knowing that, and the other peaks during that we already looked at, which we know are during the peak season, didn't meet it, you can say that, most of the peaks aren't going to meet that criteria.
Part of that question was also about the actual angle at which both Old Pleasant Hill Road and Station Road meet Orrs Mill Road, right? Because it's not really that positive, it's not a full 90 degrees there in either direction. And there's a little bit of an offset between Station Road where it hits Orrs Mill Road and where Old Pleasant Hill Road hits it. And so I just, I'd like to make sure that that's examined as part of this whole process. If there were ways to improve that alignment where those roads come together. And I think I mentioned that at the last meeting.
Okay, and I mean, we did include that, Station Road, so that we could, when we did our intersection detailed analysis, so it would look at kind of the influence of those intersections together, understanding that Station Road is definitely at more of an angle, but because that volume on that road is so low, we didn't see it as warranting that. But we can take another look at it and directly respond to that question.
It's just anytime we have a very slight offset, meeting the primary between those 2 secondaries, it's just not that, you know what I'm saying, that intersection right there, if you really zoom in on where Old Pleasant Hill Road, Station Road, and Orrs Mill Road, where that intersection takes place, it doesn't have the look of a designed intersection, but something that was sort of happenstance.
Right. And I think part of it, because like I said, Station Road has such a low volume on it, it's not as influential as if it was, a higher volume road that might have more influence on Old Pleasant Hill. So when we analyzed it, it wasn't showing much of a negative impact, but I understand your point, and we can take another look at it. One thing we did look at, which is, I'll jump ahead a little bit, but one thing we did look at is coming out of Old Pleasant Hill Road, the sight lines. Actually, we looked at it, the sight distance on both Orrs Mills and Old Pleasant Hill Road. Even though it's an existing intersection, we did look at it, and we are making some recommendation to clear some of the vegetation in this southeast quadrant of the intersection. So if you were leaving Old Pleasant Hill and looking to the left, there is some vegetation and some embankment of the roadway that we are recommending removing, which will help that intersection by increasing the sight line. There is existing intersection warning sign on this approach on the traveling westbound, so that actually does mitigate sight distance as well. But we did make a recommendation to do some clearing here to maximize that sight line. And just briefly, going beyond the phase 1 evaluation, like I said, we went into the phase 2, which included some additional distribution of Storm King trips down onto Pleasant Hill Road from the south end and accessing the site through Bunny Road. And again, that was for another 10 years out. So there was additional growth with both Storm King and background growth rate. And really that analysis didn't show any changes from what we had already recommended at these intersections up here. It didn't change any of those recommendations. And these 2 additional Junger Road and Bunny Road intersections were found to operate with actually good levels of service with pretty low delays. So no recommendations were made, other than when we did look at Bunny Road again, because this will be a new access point. We looked at the sight lines here. Bunny Road itself is already being proposed to move it 50 feet from its existing farther north, to pull it a little bit away from the bridge. And we are making some recommendation for some clearing of vegetation, and also to put an intersection warning sign on the southbound approach here. One other thing we looked at here was Bunny Road down the end during phase 1 and phase 2 will be used for deliveries of sculptures, which will be large vehicles, but they will not happen very often. There will be, so it's not going to be a regular daily. It's going to be few and far between when those deliveries are made. But because they are larger vehicles and there will be some tracking, we've made a recommendation to have some kind of a traffic management plan put in place so that when those big heavy vehicles are there, that there'll be some either flaggers or something. I mean, we have to, develop a plan with the town as we move forward, and the county, because it is a county road, but that is a recommendation we made as well at that location. So kind of in summary, like I said, although like the master plan really doesn't directly result in trip generations, we really did a very detailed and comprehensive study of the external roadway network. We did identify some mitigation. And again, Storm King, if the Department of Transportation agrees that the mitigation, because they are on 2 state intersections, if the department agrees with that mitigation is needed, then Storm King is willing to or is willing to and wants to contribute towards like what to mitigate their impact. Like what is the impact that Storm King traffic has at those 2 locations? They are committed to doing that. And then the other mitigation, again, like I had just talked about, is some site distance clearing and a couple of signs at those 2 access road intersections into the site.
Wendy, that was an excellent summary. Thanks for your efforts. Does any board member have any questions on it? Before I do that, let me just ask that the board authorize the town to consider hiring Bill Greeley so that we can have a traffic assessment of the report.
Do we need a motion for that?
Yes, I do.
So moved.
Second? Okay. With that, Amy, we'll have you'll have contact directly with Mr. Greeley, and as you know them, that might be helpful. Mark, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I've already spoke with Phil. He has a copy of all the literature and all the studies and backup information. So we've already had some preliminary discussions, but he was really waiting for the board to authorize him to proceed tonight. Mr. Chairman, when you authorize me to speak on my comments, I'll add some more.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Mark, do you have any comments?
I do.
Okay.
My first comment was just the action you just took, which was to get Phil Greeley on board. Phil is very familiar with the town of Cornwall and has done a tremendous amount of work over the last decades with us, and I'm very pleased that he'll be assisting us on this. My second comment asks that if the board has any specific concerns, and I know Led has shared a couple with me, and I've already generally discussed them with Phil. If any other board members have specific concerns and you want to think them out and send me an email, feel free to do so, because I'll be coordinating this with Phil as I have some backup information and some concerns that I want to go over with him, so that we in turn can probably have a Zoom meeting with Wendy and the team just to drill down somewhere along the line between this meeting and perhaps the next meeting or one after the next to get some of the traffic issues resolved. Relative to the traffic, just some comments that weren't part of my formal comments, but I'll just note them. I agree that there's some real concern about the traffic movements at Ores Mills Road and Route 32. So that's goes without saying, an intersection that is really of concern. I don't know if Wendy's aware of it, but several years ago, and of course, sometimes I say several years and it might be 10 years, the DOT actually had a design team evaluating that particular portion of the Route 32 corridor, looking at 32 from Quaker Avenue, just to the south of Quaker Avenue, beyond Ores Mills, for the possible reconstruction of the Moodna Bridge on 32. And they had done some studies about the queuing lanes, about turning lanes onto Ores Mills. So when the time is appropriate and we bring DOT into the discussion, perhaps they can dig up that old report and share some of their evaluations and design thoughts with both the town and Wendy. They had some meetings with Supervisor Randazzo and myself years ago on that project. So that has some history. Also, something that I don't believe the traffic study acknowledges is that Angola Road is in fact County Route 9. So you pretty much are surrounded by county roads and state roads. So you may want to make note of that so that the next iteration of the traffic study acknowledges the county has another road involved in the study.
Mhm.
The issue that was raised by Member Klosky, the issue of Old Pleasant Hill Road, isn't just a turning movement issue. It is, in fact, I agree with him, an alignment issue that the town has run into on numerous intersections, and the merits of perhaps making a minor adjustment to the alignment to enhance the operation in addition to any sight distance would certainly be something that the town would be interested in, and I'm sure the county may in fact support as well. Last comment just from the presentation, and I don't want to drag on because it was pretty thorough. There were some display elements, I believe, that were in your presentation that I don't recall seeing in the traffic study, the queuing lanes on 32 and the percentage of utilization of the same by the art center versus the general traffic population. So I think maybe if you have some supplemental information that you want to share that I could send down to Phil to supplement the current study, it would make him 100% up to date.
Okay, yeah, I
So-
can share that information. Those percentages of the queuing, it's in the text of the report, but there is not a figure.
The
in
plates,
report.
yeah, they just help out
Yeah,
visualizing
no,
it.
yeah, and that's why I did it, because I had to talk enough, but I do actually have the parking study to go through too, if you are ready to hear more.
So Mark, can I amplify one thing there? And that's that I've thought for some time that they split out the lane. As soon as you get across the bridge northbound on 32, they split to the double 55-mile-an-hour northbound there before the intersection with Orrs Mill Road. It has been my long-held opinion that they should not do that split until after the intersection movement in order to allow those making the left from Orrs Mill onto 32, which is, I think, the most likely fatal accident if somebody is on Orrs Mill Road is making a left onto 32 northbound. We've had some bad interactions there before, and I think part of that's because that split happens too early. And I know nobody's going to want to hear that going to one lane from two is better, but I don't think we gain anything in terms of traffic throughput at that intersection by having the split versus the single lane. So I'd hold them single lane. They're already single lane coming across the bridge. I just hold them in that single lane until they're north of that intersection and preserve that turn only.
I would memorialize some suggestions in an email. One other thing, which I'll just go back in my comments. Obviously, accident history is something that I'm very familiar with, having participation in emergency services in Cornwall. The Angola Road 32 intersection has a significant accident history, but I think that we would likely want to look at some of the major intersections and their accident history as part of the study.
Mark, have we given any thought to the Beeks 32 intersection? That's a horrible intersection.
Yeah, and I don't know that. I think, you know, if the board believes that's worth looking at, but I don't know that there's much that this application and study will do other than point out an intersection we know has been problematic, although I don't believe it has the accident history because the sight lines are pretty good.
Which intersection was that? When?
Beeks,
Beeks, Holleran, and 32.
what concerns me is locals, myself being one of them. We're going to try and avoid the Orrs Mills 32 intersection if we're going north by going up Beeks. And once you get there, I mean, yeah, the sight lines aren't bad coming from the south, but looking from the north, the sight lines are terrible.
Yeah. when I'm not sure that there's any all that much traffic related to Storm King on that intersection, though. When you might have figures, but it doesn't seem to be necessarily part of this.
It's up to the board if they want to add that as an intersection of concern. I'm not quite sure.
I would like it to be an intersection of concern because I've tried to get out of it, get across onto 32 North from there countless times. I mean, I'll defer to the other board members, but I think it's something that should be looked at.
The only thing that I have found with Beeks and 32 is that if by chance someone that might be going to the art center does not make that turn to go, or the traffic is backed up to be able to make the turn to go on to Orrs Mill Road, I have seen that happen where they go to Beeks and then they turn onto Beeks to head down to Orrs Mill. But I'm sure that's at a limited time frame, so I don't know if
Mary Beth, I'm more concerned about people
the board would be looking
off
at.
of Beeks onto 32 North.
What was that? I'm sorry.
I'm more concerned about people trying to come up Beeks and make a left onto 32 North.
So you're talking about more local traffic than you are traffic coming
You
from
know what?
Storm Center.
With Waze and Google Maps and Apple Maps, I don't know that I'm any longer concerned about local traffic. If you're coming out of Storm King Art Center and you want to go to Billy Joe's Rib Works, it's probably going to tell you to go up Beeks Road.
Well, certainly worth considering. I think maybe when Phil comes on, Mark, we can ask Phil to have a look at that.
I'll add that to the items of discussion.
Okay,
Thank
that's
you.
fair. When would that satisfy you?
Absolutely. I just want it to be part of the discussion.
That's
all.
fine. We'll mention it to Phil and see what he has to say about it. That's great. Okay. Is Wendy still here?
I am.
Oh. Every time I mention somebody, they magically pop up on my screen. It's really good. Did you mention you wanted to do a brief on parking?
Yeah, well, the other study that we had done is a parking justification. I know I'm taking up a lot of time, but I think it's important to review that as well. So you can still see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so this figure is just kind of a brief overview of the north parking lot that we're talking about, where in that phase one, we have 584 parking stalls. And part of the justification was to figure out kind of the right sizing of the parking lot that was going to be included on the site that really would meet Storm King's needs the majority of the time, and also preserve the natural environment, and really to do responsible planning on the site. And to that end, even, the proposal is not to pave all of the spaces, kind of knowing, again, the seasons at Storm King fluctuate, throughout the year. So the pink stalls here is just kind of a visual, like this is Old Pleasant Hill Road, Orrs Mills Road is at the top of the screen. So the pink here is the paved spaces that would be part of that 597 overall spaces, which the 365 are paved, and again, that's in the pink. These, the purple spaces over here are the gravel spaces, the 219. And then in the green area here, this is like the loop, the drop-off area for taxis, rideshare vehicles, and buses. So those are kind of temporary spaces that are not, people don't park there all day, but they're kind of the drop-off loop areas. So during this process, again, like I said, it was a pretty extensive study that we looked at to really get the right sizing of the parking lot. So in October in 2018, when we collected for the traffic study, we collected daily volumes on Old Pleasant Hill Road, and we were able to take those counts and look at the ins and outs at the site to determine, like, the maximum park, like how many cars were staying on site. If we know how many are coming in and how many are coming out, the differential tells us how many people are still on the site. So we took those numbers and then equated them to the daily attendance to come up with kind of a peak parking demand rate based on attendance. So then we look at the fluctuation in attendance over the year to really figure out, throughout the year, the fluctuation in the maximum parking demand needs on the site. So then those numbers were then projected again to that 2023 condition, kind of using the same process we did with a 7% growth in attendance. So, we really upped those numbers, and then also, accounted for the other ride share and not the ride share, but the Metro North and those increases. So we really looked at, again, that 7% growth over those several years to figure out that maximum demand. And what we found when we did that study is that with that, again, it's kind of 584 is the combination of the gravel spaces and the paved spaces that are used for public parking. There are some other spaces on the site, like near the museum building and near the admin building. Those weren't really accounted for in this evaluation because those aren't really for use by the public patrons that are coming to the site. So it really focused just on this specific lot. So when we did our analysis, what it showed is that with those 584 public stalls, that there's 15 days out of the year that off-site parking would be needed. And the other, it's actually 187 operational days. So out of that 187 days, only 15 days we would need off-site parking. So this chart kind of breaks it down pretty easily. So the paved lot would be utilized basically 75% of the operational days. The paved lot would satisfy the number of cars on the site, with 143 out of those 187 operational days. Then you add on another 29 days of that 187 days. The gravel lot would also be utilized to some extent. So that's another 17% of the days. And again, like I said, that offsite is only 15 days a year, which really accounts for 8%. So at that 584 spots, like 92% of the days when Storm King's operating in 2023, we anticipate that the paved lot and the gravel lot will be able to accommodate the parking demand on the site. And just one thing to note, when we kind of got to that, just around the 580, changing the spaces by plus or minus 25, or it doesn't really like move this needle here. It really is once you get to that point, like, and jump into the offsite, you would have to add quite a bit more on the site to really move the needle. So that really became kind of that sweet spot, is about a 580 parking stalls there. And then, as we noted, as Storm King continues to grow, that phase 2 is also being put in place as part of the master plan so that if the needs continue to increase over time, that 260 spaces could also be to be built at the southern end of the site. So that was kind of quick, but
very, very well done. Thank you, Wendy, for that.
Yep, you're welcome.
Board members, do you have any questions? Hearing
Wendy,
none.
I have one quick question, which I think I probably know the answer to. Have you taken into account special events that are held at the museum?
So again, when we did the counts in October, it was actually during the second highest day of the season. So that does include, typical like the peak season. I don't know that we didn't include like an exact special event, but I know, like, based on we have the data from the entire years, and we really are looking at basing all of our assessments on the highest. And we looked at the attendance throughout the entire year that would kind of look at what is fluctuating over an entire season of events and things that are happening on the site.
When you're speaking about events that are not characteristic of the normal museum attendance?
Yeah, I'm thinking in terms of, well, I'm on the board of the Cornwall Chamber. We have an event scheduled for, I think, October, which will probably draw 200 or 300 cars. And that's just one. I know that they have member events during the course of the year. I can't imagine that weddings is going to tax the parking facilities, but there are a variety of special events during the course of the year. Maybe Amy can speak to that.
Sure. Yeah, I think we very much did take this into account. So, if you're thinking about a couple of hundred cars on, the Tuesday night that the Cornwall Chamber of Commerce is there, or, that it's very much how we schedule those events, and we are, our lot can clearly handle them, and obviously the incentive would be to make sure they don't conflict with another very busy thing. And that's very much the scheduling work that my operational colleagues have been doing for quite some time. So I think that is well attended to here.
Okay, thank you.
With that, Dominic, I don't think there's any action formally that the planning board could take aside from the appointment of Mr. Greeley. Am I correct? Dominic? He's on mute.
You're right. I was on mute. Sorry about that. So you're absolutely correct. There's no procedural step for the board to take at this time. At some point, the board will have to decide whether or not the applicant has addressed potential environmental impacts or not, and make a secret determination at that point. I think the next step would be to follow up as the board has moved to bring Phil Greeley on board and to have him conduct his review of the information that's been presented by the applicant and provide his comments to the board. And then the board can move on from there. One question I did have is whether or not the applicant intends to make any additional submissions at this time. I know that there's been a very detailed proposed master plan as part of their site plan, and they've received some comments on it. I don't, just wondering whether or not there's an intent to make any following submissions, or rather to wait and see what comments and suggestions Mr. Greeley may have.
Yeah, so I would like to, I would be happy to address that. So we are actually in the process of finalizing a lot of the site plans, landscaping plans. As you know, that this site is a large site and there's been a lot of moving pieces. And so we're just finalizing all those plans as well as the SWIP. And we are also working on an expanded environmental assessment report for the board, which will summarize all of the various topics, environmental topics, and the overall impacts associated with each one of those topics. So we are hoping to be able to provide you the environmental report along with the latest drafts of all the stormwater prevention plan as well as the site
Can
plans
I ask
within
a
the next
favor on
month or
that?
two.
So one of the things I noted about the traffic study is that we received about 40 pages of what I would call actionable data that was useful to the board. And then there was a huge, like a telephone book worth of data that went behind that. And I understand that that's a required part of the submission to our planning board office. But Dominic, if there are ways to work with the applicant to provide these things in an online setting, I really, by the time you get to about page 220, I'm wondering what the utility to the board is of having the exact count on a particular date of a particular intersection. And with these landscaping plans and these sorts of things, if it makes it easier for the applicant to make them available to the board and to inform the town and the board about their proposed actions by perhaps including the appendices in an online way, and then having some kind of executive summary that's coming out to us with our packets, I think that could be more useful and more environmentally friendly than the giant notebook approach that we have often taken to environmental investigations. I mean, it has always been a contrast to me that we do an environmental investigation and the first thing we do as part of that is burn 15 or 20 reams of paper that no one's likely to look at in the back of those reports. So if there's a way of facilitating that, especially given the magnitude of this particular master plan and planning effort,
let all the documents came in electronically as well, because that's my preferred data storage method. So
me too.
The fact that the electronic was available, I was able to send it down to Phil without worrying about postage and the volume of paper that we're wasting. So Phil has it electronically. So
Well, let
Maybe
me
you
ask the
talk
other
to-
members of the board, does anybody actually prefer receiving, all these data, the data portions of these reports in a hard copy?
I need to point out that paper is a renewable resource.
Yes, thank you, Ed. I understood that you would have a comment on that, but these things are thick, and
I think your
Just-
idea is, Led, I think your idea is excellent. I think should look to the board. When you don't like the idea, but where's Mary Beth? Well, Mary Beth,
I was
Mary
muted.
Beth,
Sorry, I'm here.
are you?
I make notes with the paper, and I can bring it with me. It's more via transportation wise with my schedule. But either way, I believe the building department actually sends out an email each month to find out how you would like your information provided. I know I've
They
received
do.
that. And
That's correct.
depending on what's on the agenda is, what would be answered. So really that's
Yeah,
kind of,
On
to
that
be
basis,
clear, I'm not proposing the entire report is in a electronic copy. I'm just saying that like this traffic report, there's clearly 30 or 40 pages at the beginning, which is the body of the report, chapters 1 through 5. But then there's hundreds of pages of just data. And with stormwater studies, it's often the same. And I just, if it's possible that those appendices, and Mary Beth, I'm not proposing that the whole report is not sent out to the board members. I like to read the hard copy too, when I suppose that should make you happy. But in terms of all those reams and reams of appendices is more what I'm talking about.
Well, one of the things that we're anticipating doing as part of this environmental report is we're basically summarizing within the report the overall potential impacts. And then in the appendices, we're having, for example, like the stormwater pollution prevention plan, the traffic impact analysis as part of the appendix. So what we could do is we'll reach out to Diane and see, one of the options is to provide printed copies of the report and then electronic version of the appendices. And if somebody wants a particular appendices printed out, we're more than happy to do so. I mean, I can even send Diane the overall table of contents, and she can just sort of, ask the board if there's particular studies that you would like to see hard copy versus,
Fine.
electronic.
Fine.
Sounds good.
That's great.
I just need to point out that although paper is a renewable resource, I'd rather receive as much of it as possible electronically, because I just don't have room for this stuff in my office.
I understand.
Well, board, if I think that if you just simply let Diane know, if you prefer it in
Absolutely.
paper or digitally, that's fine. I agree with Led. I think that it's much easier for me digitally. And if I like the piece, I'll just print it up myself. But that's just my way of doing it in Led. So I think we can make it, I'll speak to Diane and make it, she can make it available for your request. And Mary Beth, if you'd like a hard copy, you can have a hard copy and so forth. Is that reasonable for everybody?
Well, that's the way it has been.
Yeah. So is that okay?
Diane seemed to be a little bit overwhelmed with this one because there was so much information, and she forwarded us multiple emails, which quite frankly, once Gary dropped off the packet, I didn't bother with, but normally I would have.
Well, there's more to come. I can guarantee you that. So
That's why I asked the
we'll try to
question.
make it as easy as possible for the review. But we'll coordinate with Diane.
Very good.
The last thing we wanted to also, one of the things we did want to request tonight, if it's possible, that we'd like to request that the board send the traffic report and the traffic study and the parking study to the New York State Department of Transportation, as well as the county at this point, to begin, so that they can begin their review as well. And then that way we can, start working on any comments or feedback that we receive from those agencies, especially since, as you know, they're going to be intricately involved in this overall review.
Let me ask Mark, do you think that it'd be more appropriate to have Phil review it first, or?
My suggestion is we let Phil take a first
Okay.
review on it in case he believes there's any supplemental information needed. I'd rather not send it to the county and the DOT twice.
Okay.
They get bogged down enough of when we send it to them a single time. So
Well,
let's let Phil have a look at it. And on that issue with Phil, if the board has no objection, I very much doubt that Phil will be in a position at the work session on the 16th to discuss this application, but I'd like to, if the board has no objection, set up a separate technical meeting just for this project, because I'm sure it'll take a lot more than a 20-minute or a 30-minute slot. So if the board doesn't object, I'll probably coordinate that technical meeting just to discuss the traffic side.
Right, board, I'm looking for any objections to that. I think it's a very reasonable idea. Lead gives a thumbs up. Bill?
No problem with that.
Mary Beth?
I'm
That's
good with it.
Okay, Win, you're okay? That's fine, Mark. You can go ahead and do that, okay?
We'll try to keep it moving as soon as Phil's
Yeah,
ready.
let's keep this thing moving. It's very professionally done. We appreciate the efforts on behalf of Storm King Arts. You guys have done a really very, very good job, and every presentation has been most professional. So there's no complaints, and we'll try and do our part in expediting. And with that, thank you.
All right, thank
for
you.
having
Thank you.
us.
Thank you.
And board, I think that with that, I don't believe we have anything else. But anybody on the board have any other comments? Consultants, you guys did a great job. Kristen, Mark, Dominic, great job tonight. With that, I'll ask
Thank
for a
you.
motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second, okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, good night all, and thank you all very much.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Good night, everybody. It was good seeing you all.
Good seeing you.
Take care.
Great job, Dominic.
Thanks. Bye-bye.